You're not suicidal. You're not standing on the edge of anything. You're not writing goodbye messages or disappearing from the people who know you. You're still here. You still wake up every morning. You still answer when someone calls your name. You still do what needs to be done. From the outside, your life looks intact, stable, functional, normal. And that's what makes this so hard to explain, because nothing is visibly wrong. You're not falling apart. You're not breaking down. You're not asking for help, but something inside you isn't there anymore. You move through your days, completing tasks, responding to conversations, making decisions, but you don't feel present in any of it. It's like your body learned how to continue without waiting for you to come with it. You're not suffering enough to stop, but you're not alive enough to feel connected. You exist, but you don't arrive. You laugh, but it sounds distant. You rest, but you don't feel restored. You reach the end of the day, and nothing inside you feels different from when it began. No impact, no imprint, just time passing without touching you. And the strangest part is, you don't want to die. That's not the problem. You still care about people. You still have responsibilities. You still have reasons to continue. But continuing doesn't feel the same as living. It feels automatic, unquestioned, empty in a way that doesn't hurt, but doesn't heal either. You tell yourself this is what adulthood feels like. Less intensity, less emotion, less chaos. You tell yourself this is peace, but deep down, there's a quiet awareness that this isn't peace. Peace still feels alive. This feels like absence. You're not suicidal. You're just no longer fully here. And maybe the scariest part is no one can see the difference. Not even you. Not until it's been this way for a long time. At first, you didn't notice it happening. There was no single moment where everything went dark. No clear breaking point. No day you woke up and said, something inside me is gone. It was quieter than that. Slower. You just started feeling less excited, less affected, less there. Things that used to reach you stopped reaching you. Not because they stopped mattering, but because something in you stopped responding. You told yourself it was normal. This is what growing up feels like. This is what maturity looks like. You become calmer, more stable, less emotional, less reactive. You stop being controlled by feelings. And everyone around you seems to reward that version of you. They call you strong, reliable, grounded. They trust you. They depend on you. And you learn to depend on yourself too. Not emotionally, functionally. You learn how to continue without needing to feel connected to what you're doing. And that's when the shift completes itself. Not when you become sad, but when you stop noticing that you're not happy. Not when you break down, but when you stop expecting anything to move you. You stop asking yourself if you feel alive, because part of you already knows the answer. And asking the question would make it real. You keep going. You follow the path in front of you. You wake up, you work, you talk, you sleep, and repeat. Not because you chose this life consciously, but because nothing inside you objects strongly enough to stop it. You're not trapped. You're just not connected. And this is the part no one prepares you for. You can live like this for years, decades even. Without realizing, you slowly stopped existing inside your own life. You didn't want to die. You just stopped checking if you were alive. And the most dangerous part is, it doesn't feel like an emergency. It feels normal. You probably don't call it suffering, because suffering feels too dramatic, too obvious, too easy to recognize. And this doesn't look like suffering. This looks like stability. You're not losing control. You're not falling behind. You're not destroying your life. You're maintaining it perfectly. And that's why it's so hard to question, because everything still works. You still function. You still respond. You still show up. But showing up is not the same as being there. There's a difference between participating in your life and performing it. And somewhere along the way, you learned how to perform. You learned the right reactions, the right timing, the right words. You learned how to smile when smiling was expected. You learned how to nod when listening was required. You learned how to say, "I'm good," without checking if it was true. And eventually, you stopped checking entirely, because checking would slow you down. Checking would interrupt the momentum. Checking would force you to confront something you didn't have time to feel. So you adapted. You became efficient, emotionally efficient. You stopped investing energy into experiences that didn't guarantee safety. You stopped opening yourself fully to moments that might leave you exposed. You stopped expecting life to feel like anything more than manageable. And manageable became your definition of okay. Not meaningful, not fulfilling, just manageable. You weren't excited, but you weren't disappointed either. You weren't inspired, but you weren't devastated. You existed in the middle, where nothing hurt enough to demand change, and nothing mattered enough to wake you up. Asna, you might remember a time when things felt different. Not easier, not better, but sharper, more vivid. You remember caring more, wanting more, feeling more affected by everything. A conversation could stay with you for days. A possibility could keep you awake at night. A single moment could change the direction of your thoughts. Life didn't always feel safe, but it felt real. And now, it feels distant, not gone, just out of reach. Like watching something through glass. You see it, you understand it, but you don't feel inside it. This is the conflict no one talks about. You don't want your life to end, but you don't feel connected to continuing it either. You don't wake up with dread, but you don't wake up with anticipation. You don't feel trapped, but you don't feel free. You feel suspended, in between, alive, but not living. And because there's no visible crisis, you assume this is normal. You assume this is what people mean when they say life becomes routine, predictable, stable. You assume the intensity you once felt was just immaturity, just emotional excess, something you were supposed to outgrow, so you don't question the numbness. You respect it. You treat it like progress, proof that you've learned how to control yourself, proof that you've learned how to survive. But survival is not the same as presence. Survival is automatic. Presence is chosen. Survival continues without you. Presence requires you, and somewhere along the way, your life continued without your presence. Not all at once, not in a way anyone could see, but gradually, quietly. You stopped bringing yourself fully into your moments. You stopped allowing yourself to be affected. You stopped risking emotional exposure because exposure meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant vulnerability, and vulnerability once hurt you in ways you never explained. So you learned something powerful. You learned how to live without needing to feel alive. You learned how to continue without needing to feel connected. You learned how to exist without needing to be present. And this ability made you strong, reliable, independent, but it also made you distant from others, from your experiences, from yourself. You don't feel suicidal. You don't want everything to end, but you don't feel attached to being here either. If tomorrow came, you would continue. If nothing changed, you would continue, not because you chose it, but because continuation became your default state, your automatic response, your emotional baseline. And this is where the deepest loss happens. Not when you want to die, but when you stop expecting to feel alive. When you stop believing your life is supposed to feel like something. When you stop imagining that something inside you could still wake up. Because imagination requires hope, and hope requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires feeling. And feeling is what you learn to live without. You didn't decide this consciously. You didn't choose disconnection as a philosophy. You arrived here through repetition, through adaptation, through protecting yourself from emotional risk, until protection became permanent, until numbness became normal, until absence became identity. And now you move through your life with a quiet competence. You do what needs to be done. You fulfill your responsibilities. You maintain your relationships. You exist. But sometimes, in the rare moments when everything is quiet, when there's nothing distracting you, nothing demanding your attention, nothing to perform, a question appears. Not loud, not urgent, but impossible to ignore once you notice it. The question is simple and terrifying. When was the last time I actually felt alive? Not satisfied, not comfortable, not safe, alive. And if you can't answer that question, or if the answer feels too far away to reach, that's when something inside you begins to realize. This isn't just stability. This isn't just adulthood. This isn't just life. This is disappearance. Not physical disappearance, internal disappearance. The kind no one sees, the kind no one interrupts, the kind that can last forever. If you never question it, you're not suicidal. You're still here. But being here and being alive are not the same thing. This didn't happen because you gave up. It happened because you adapted. Because at some point, being fully alive felt unsafe. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way anyone could point to and say, that's when you disappeared. It was quieter, more reasonable than that. It happened in the moments you didn't process, the disappointments you minimized, The endings you never fully grieved. The versions of your life that didn't survive, but you pretended they never existed. You told yourself it didn't matter. You told yourself you were fine. You told yourself to move on, and you did. But something in you didn't. Something stayed behind. Frozen in the moment, you stopped allowing yourself to feel it. Because feeling deeply requires openness, and openness makes you vulnerable. Vulnerable to loss, vulnerable to rejection, vulnerable to realizing that some things don't last. And when that realization happens enough times, your nervous system learns a simple equation. Feeling equals risk. Risk equals pain. So it creates distance, not from the world, but from your own emotional experience of the world. You still participate. You still engage. You still exist. But there's a layer between you and everything you feel. A layer that filters intensity. A layer that protects you from impact. A layer that keeps you safe. And safety becomes your priority. Not aliveness. Not connection. Safety. You stop chasing what excites you. You start choosing what sustains you. You stop asking what moves you. You start asking what makes sense. What's stable? What's secure? What's predictable? You begin to build a life that minimizes emotional risk. And from the outside, it looks like success. It looks like maturity. It looks like you figured everything out. But internally, something essential is missing. Not happiness, not achievement. Contact. Contact with yourself. Contact with your own experience. Contact with the part of you that feels. And over time, you stop noticing the absence. Because absence becomes familiar. It becomes your normal state. You forget what intensity felt like. You forget what emotional depth felt like. You forget what it meant to be affected by your own life. Not because you chose to forget, but because remembering would disrupt the stability you built. Remembering would expose the distance. Remembering would force you to confront something uncomfortable. That you are here, but not fully. This is the part most people misunderstand. You didn't lose yourself. You protected yourself. You didn't stop living because you were weak. You stopped feeling because you were overwhelmed. Because your system reached a threshold and decided survival mattered more than connection. And survival is incredibly convincing. It tells you that stability is enough. It tells you that safety is fulfillment. It tells you that continuation is the same as meaning. But survival has one blind spot. It doesn't care if you feel alive. It only cares if you stay alive. And that's when the shift happens. Not when your life falls apart, but when you realize it never fully came together. Not internally, not emotionally. You built something that works, but you were never fully inside it. You constructed a life that your nervous system could tolerate, not necessarily a life your soul could inhabit. This is the midpoint most people never reach, because reaching it requires honesty. Honesty about the fact that numbness was never peace. It was protection. Protection from disappointment. Protection from grief. Protection from uncertainty. Protection from yourself. And protection has a cost. It prevents pain, but it also prevents presence. It prevents loss, but it also prevents love. It prevents collapse, but it also prevents aliveness. Here's the truth that changes everything. You are not disconnected because your life is wrong. You are disconnected because your nervous system stopped trusting it was safe to feel. Not safe to exist, safe to feel. And those are not the same thing. You can exist anywhere, but feeling requires permission. Permission to be affected. Permission to care. Permission to risk being changed by your own experience. Nazis. And right now, part of you is still waiting for that permission. Waiting for evidence that it's safe again. Waiting for proof that feeling won't destroy you. Waiting for you to stop treating numbness like your identity. Because numbness was never who you were. It was what you needed, at the time, to survive. And the fact that you're here now, hearing this, recognizing something in it, means something has already shifted. Not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough for awareness, enough to notice the distance, enough to realize you were never meant to live your entire life from behind emotional armor. Because armor is meant for battles, not for living. And the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to remember what your own skin feels like. So maybe this isn't something to fix. Maybe it's something to understand. Because numbness was never your enemy. It was your protection. It was the part of you that stepped in when everything else felt like too much. It carried you when you didn't have the strength to carry yourself. It helped you function when feeling fully would have broken your ability to continue. And for that, It deserves acknowledgement. Not shame, not resistance, not blame. Because the truth is, you didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you endured. You endured the moments that changed you. The moments that taught you to be careful. The moments that taught you not to expect too much. Not to hope too deeply. Not to attach too completely. You learned how to exist without relying on emotion. You learned how to survive your own life. And survival is powerful. But survival was never supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary shelter, not your final home. Because something inside you was never meant to stay asleep forever. It was meant to return. Not all at once, not in some dramatic transformation, but in small, almost invisible moments. A moment where something reaches you unexpectedly. A moment where you pause and feel present without trying. A moment where you realize you are not just watching your life happen. You are inside it, even if only briefly, even if only for seconds. And those seconds matter more than you realize, because they remind you of something essential. You were never meant to live untouched. You were never meant to move through your entire existence without being changed by it. You were meant to feel, not constantly, not overwhelmingly, but honestly, because honesty is what brings you back. Not forcing yourself to feel something artificial, not pretending to be alive, but allowing yourself to notice what is already there, underneath the numbness, underneath the adaptation, underneath the protection. Asi, you may not trust it immediately. You may not believe it fully. That's okay. Trust doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds slowly, quietly, in moments where you stop abandoning yourself, in moments where you stop dismissing your own internal signals, in moments where you stop treating numbness as the only version of yourself that exists, because it isn't. It never was. It was just the version of you that helped you survive. Asa. And survival is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your return. Not to who you were before, but to who you were underneath everything you had to become. The version of you that was never trying to disappear. The version of you that was only trying to make it through. And now, for the first time in a long time, that version of you is closer than you think. The strange thing about not living is that no one tells you when it starts. There's no warning, no visible line you cross. You just slowly become someone who exists more in routine than in reality. You wake up, but you don't arrive. You speak, but you don't express. You move, but you don't feel like the one moving. And over time, this distance becomes your identity. Not because it's who you are, but because it's who you learned how to be. You become the person who is always okay, always stable, always functioning. You become someone others rely on, someone others trust, someone others describe as strong. But strength can hide absence, because strength often means you stopped showing the parts of yourself that needed something. You stopped revealing the parts of yourself that still felt uncertain. You stopped listening to the parts of yourself that were quietly asking for more. Not more success, not more achievement, more aliveness. But aliveness requires risk. Not external risk, internal risk. The risk of being affected, the risk of caring again, the risk of discovering that underneath all the stability, there is still something unfinished inside you. Something that never fully had the chance to exist. This is why numbness is so difficult to leave behind. Not because it's permanent, but because it's familiar. It became the environment you learned to live in. It became the emotional climate you adapted to. And adaptation is powerful. It convinces you that this is who you are now. Someone calm, someone controlled, someone unaffected. But unaffected is not the same as fulfilled. Unaffected is not the same as alive. Because being alive means something can still reach you. Something can still interrupt your routine. Something can still move you without your permission, not to hurt you, but to remind you that you are still here, still capable of presence, still capable of feeling something real. And the truth is, the version of you that feels never disappeared. It went quiet. It stepped back. It waited, not for the world to change, but for you to notice it again, because identity is not erased. It's abandoned. Abandoned in the moments you chose safety over honesty. Abandoned in the moments you chose stability over truth. Abandoned in the moments you chose survival over connection. Not because you wanted to lose yourself, but because you didn't know how to keep yourself and stay safe at the same time. But now, something is different. Not your life, not your circumstances. Your awareness. You can see the distance now. You can feel the outline of it. And once you see it, you can't fully unsee it. You can't go back to believing this is the only way to exist. Because part of you knows this was never meant to be permanent. You were never meant to spend your entire life functioning without feeling alive inside it. You were never meant to become a spectator in your own existence. You were never meant to confuse emotional absence with emotional strength. Because strength is not the absence of feeling. It's the willingness to remain present, even when feeling returns. And maybe that's why you're here. Not for answers, not for solutions, but for recognition. Recognition of something you thought was gone. Recognition of something you thought you lost. Recognition of yourself. Not the version of you that survived. The version of you that still exists underneath it. Waiting. Not to become someone new, but to become someone real again. Because the moment you realize you've been living without yourself is the moment you stop calling it living. And that realization is where everything begins to change. Maybe nothing changes after this. Not immediately. You'll still wake up in the same room, still follow the same routines, still answer the same people. From the outside, your life will look exactly the same, but something inside you won't, because now you've seen it. You've seen the distance. You've seen the absence. You've seen the quiet way a person can disappear without ever leaving. And once you see that, you can't fully pretend you don't. You can't completely return to unconscious living, because awareness leaves a mark, not a loud one, not a dramatic one, but a permanent one. It stays with you in the quiet moments, in the pauses between distractions, in the spaces where you used to feel nothing, and now feel the outline of something waiting. You may not feel alive all at once. You may not suddenly reconnect with everything you lost. That's not how return works. Return begins subtly, with discomfort, with the strange realization that you don't want to spend the rest of your life absent from it. Not because your life is terrible, but because it's yours, and something inside you still wants to be there for it. Because the truth is, you were never suicidal. You never wanted your life to end. You just stopped feeling like you were inside it. You stopped recognizing yourself in your own existence. You stopped expecting your life to feel like something you belong to. And that's the quiet tragedy. Not death, disconnection, not endings, absence. But absence is not permanent. It only feels permanent when it goes unnoticed. And now it's been noticed, not judged, not forced, just seen. You were never the numbness. You were never the distance. You were the one carrying it, the one surviving it, the one adapting through it. And carriers can set things down, not all at once, not without hesitation, but gradually, intentionally, honestly. And because the moment you realize you've been missing from your own life is the moment something begins to return. Not the old version of you, not the version untouched by pain, but the version of you that knows what it means to lose yourself and is finally ready to stop leaving. Yes. And maybe one day, in a moment so ordinary it almost feels insignificant, you'll notice something. You'll be sitting there doing nothing special. And for the first time in a long time, you won't feel like you're watching your life. You'll feel like you're inside it. Not performing, not maintaining, not surviving, living. And you'll realize you were never trying to die. You were trying to come back to the only place you were ever meant to be. Here,